Hi there, folks. Congratulations on finishing your Anger Rising reading check. I'm going to try to communicate some key ideas for you for the Unit 2 American Revolution unit. Now, where we're going to do that is on this notes sheet. This is going to be something that's going to be pretty regular for us in U.S. history. So go to your Google Classroom. Doesn't have to be hour 3. Go to your Google Classroom and you'll see this notes sheet. I'm going to have you open that up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you just A, B, C, and D right now. But I want to talk to you about some of these key beginning concepts. So you'll just follow along, and in the orange chunks, you'll just fill in what I'm talking about here, okay? So we'll start with these two key pre-revolution concepts, right? So we understand that there's going to be this war called the American Revolution, but none of it makes much sense if we don't understand a couple of these key concepts, right? Now, the reason I put this logo up here is this is a Minnesota Twins logo, and you can see the two cities, St. Paul and Minneapolis. They're close by. They're just across the river. They're shaking hands. They're good buddies, right? And the idea is because they're so close, they're good friends. Well, that's not always the case. Just because you're physically close to someone doesn't mean that you're actually close. You can think about somebody that you might sit next to in a class that you're not that close to. The same is true for all these colonies, right? The colonies are not united. If you think back to Unit 1, they're brought to North America for lots of different reasons. Jamestown, for instance, is there to get rich. Meanwhile, the Puritans in Massachusetts Bay, they're there to live, quote-unquote, the right life with no freak dancing, no gambling, and a lot of praying, right? So what you need to understand, otherwise this doesn't seem exciting. Otherwise, the American Revolution isn't this huge challenge. This isn't a family trying to defend itself. These are colonies that are not united, just like Jamestown and Massachusetts Bay were completely different places. The 13 colonies, right, so the number of colonies since Unit 1 has grown, and the 13 of them are very unique and independent. They don't see themselves as a family. They don't see themselves as Minnie and Paul, just close by and good friends. They see themselves as very different places. So that's a key concept that's very different than the way we see our states or colonies. The other key idea is this concept of certain inalienable rights, right? So here's what you have to understand what was going on pretty much for all of human history, and this is really a review from 9th grade. For centuries in Europe, it was assumed the king, who was also the government, received power directly from God. Since many people trusted God, they thought that they had to trust the government, right? So this is the famous picture from the roof of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo painted this, and this is supposedly supposed to depict, right, a time when God reached out and gave life to humanity. Bunch of white dudes, maybe not accurate, but nonetheless, this is this famous painting that's supposed to depict when God came down from the heaven with all these angels and gave humans life, right? But in reality, for centuries in Europe, it was assumed that God came down and touched not regular humans, not some naked guy, but the king. And so who are you, went the mindset, went the thought process, who are you to argue with the government, who was always a king, when clearly God came down and touched the king and gave the king the power? That was the way most people viewed their world, really up until the colonies started showing up in North America, at least in Europe. And that's what it brings us to this guy, who a couple of you, I know if you had Miss Anderson last year, a couple of you were this guy, right? Quiz, do you remember what this guy's name is? He's got great hair. He goes on, in name anyways, to be a character in one of the greatest TV shows of all time, Lost. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about who came up with this idea of unalienable or inalienable rights. The colonists were hugely influenced by the writing of this cat, John Locke. And John Locke looked at this picture back here and he said, I don't know if this is how it works. I don't know if God works through these kings, right? And so this is where this idea comes on that really shakes the Western world, that shapes that 9th grade Western civilization world that you looked at. During this period called the Enlightenment, which I know you studied, where John Locke was crushing these crazy ideas, Locke's idea was that God gave power not to a king, but directly to every individual. in the form of automatic, inalienable rights. The right to their life, the right to their possessions, and the right to a certain number of rights. Okay? Then the people could give the government some power if the people decided to. So Locke says no to this idea of God coming down and touching a king, and instead says, yeah, Michelangelo had it right, that God comes down to each individual person and gives them life, possessions, and rights. And if they want to give some of those powers to the government, they can do so, but it's their choice, the people, right? Now, this is heavy on the religious thing, heavy on this idea of God, but this is the way that John Locke and many of the colonists began to view their world, that God gave them a list of certain things that maybe they could give to the government if they wanted to, right? But certainly God did not come down and give everything to this one dude in a fancy crown. Okay, that's a key idea, and it's going to really shape the move forward here. Now, the other two terms, pretty straightforward, pretty key. Not everybody's a fan of the National Football League, but there is a team in the NFL that plays in New England, right, which is where the colonies all were located, and their professional football team is called the Patriots. This is their old logo here. This is kind of their current logo, and the team name is the Patriots, right? And so the Patriots, the reason the football team is named it is because they're giving credit to these colonists who lived in North America, who supported independence from Britain. They're the ones who said we should break away, right? Crispus Attucks was upset with the British government. Out of these other characters we're going to learn about, they were patriots, which today we take to mean you love your country. But in Great Britain and in New England, what that meant was you wanted to break away from Great Britain. Okay, and one of their classic things that you just took read about and took notes on was this idea of they were getting taxed without representation. And the classic meme says you should not simply get taxed unless you have a voice, unless you have a representative. And that's one of the things the Patriots really went back to. Now, not everybody was a patriot. Not everybody wanted to break away, and for good reason. There were lots of loyalists, right? Colonial supporters of the crown, which means the king. There were lots of people who lived in North America who did a couple things. One, they said, Great Britain is where my family's from. Number two, they are strong and powerful, so it's a good business opportunity. And three, how could we ever beat the strongest military in the world? So there were lots of loyalists for lots of different reasons. They liked this kind of flag. Sure, 13 stripes for the 13 original colonies, but let it be known that we ultimately are part of Great Britain. Okay? So we have these four big concepts, right? First of all, the idea that the colonies are not united. They're not just one big happy family, that they're very diverse. Okay? Then we have this idea that people thought that God really gave power directly to the king. So if you're arguing with the king, you're arguing with God, which a lot of people said that's a dicey situation. John Locke comes along and says, I don't know if God gave all the power right to kings. I think God gave power, individual power, that cannot be taken away to every single human. And we as humans might give that power to our government, but we're going to choose that, right? And then we have these two groups that begin to form in North America. Patriots, who want to break away from Great Britain, and the Loyalists, who are like, I don't think that's going to be a good deal. So what you've done, hopefully, is you've taken this information, you've jotted it down on the notes sheet, and you're a step closer to crushing the final assessment that we'll have in this unit. Thanks.